What if the reason you are not moving forward has nothing to do with talent, intelligence, or opportunity? What if the real problem is that your mind is being pulled apart, piece by piece, by noise, reaction, and the constant need to be noticed? You are not stuck because you are incapable. You are stuck because your attention is scattered. You react too quickly. You explain yourself too often. You keep trying to be seen, understood, approved, and validated. And while you are spending your energy trying to prove yourself, someone else is quietly building a life you will one day call impressive. They are not louder than you. They are not moving faster than you. They are not announcing every step, defending every decision, or asking the world to notice their effort. They are simply more focused. While others perform, they build. While others chase approval, they stack discipline in private moments no one claps for. And that is the difference most people miss. Real transformation does not happen when everyone is watching. It happens in the unseen hours. It happens when you stop reacting to every little thing, when you sit with discomfort instead of running from it, when you choose not to speak just to feel important, and instead choose to act with purpose. Silence is not weakness. It is not laziness. It is not the absence of movement. Silence is control. It is deliberate. It is the place where clarity begins to form, and where quiet power starts to compound. The less you need to prove yourself, the more energy you have to build yourself. And once you understand that, the way you move through life begins to change. You stop wasting your focus on noise. You stop giving your attention to every opinion, every criticism, every distraction. You begin to realize that silence is not the absence of action. It is the removal of interference, so your action can become sharper, cleaner, and more powerful. Most people confuse being busy with being effective. They fill their days with movement, conversations, reactions, notifications, and constant stimulation. Then, at the end of the day, they wonder why nothing meaningful has changed. They were active, but they were not directed. They were moving, but not building. And activity without direction is nothing more than scattered energy. It may look productive from the outside, but it does not create anything lasting. Scattered energy cannot build a strong body, a strong mind, a meaningful career, or a disciplined life. It only creates exhaustion. Silence gathers that scattered energy back into one place. It cuts away the unnecessary noise, the distractions, the impulse to answer everything, and the need to constantly explain yourself. It forces your attention back onto what actually matters. When you choose silence, you are not stepping away from life. You are stepping into control. You are deciding that not everything deserves your attention, not every opinion deserves your response, and not every moment needs to be filled just because emptiness feels uncomfortable. That decision alone separates you from most people, because most people are driven by impulse. A notification appears, and they react. A message arrives, and they respond immediately. Someone challenges them, and they defend themselves without thinking. A small trigger appears, and their entire mood changes. Over time, this fragments their focus. They lose the ability to stay with one thought, one task, one goal, or one direction long enough to build anything real. Silence reverses that damage. It trains your mind to stay, to hold attention, to go deeper instead of wider. Think about what happens when your mind is constantly stimulated. You jump from one thing to another. You begin one task, then quickly reach for something else. You feel restless when nothing is happening. You start projects, but lose interest before they gain momentum. You feel busy, but not truly productive. And by the end of the day, you are drained, but you cannot clearly explain what you actually accomplished. That is not because you are lazy. It is because your attention has been divided too many times. Every distraction takes a piece of your cognitive energy. Every interruption weakens your momentum. Every unnecessary reaction pulls you away from the work that could actually change your life. And when your energy is spread thin, your actions lose force. Silence restores that force by removing the constant pull. It gives your thoughts room to settle. And when your thoughts settle, your decisions become sharper. You stop moving from impulse and start moving from intention. Focus is not something you magically find one day. Focus is something you protect. And silence is the shield that protects it. When you reduce the noise around you, you begin to notice how much of your behavior has been automatic. You start seeing the patterns that were quietly running your life. The habits you repeated without questioning. The small reactions that controlled your mood. The distractions you reached for without thinking. The excuses that sounded reasonable but kept you in the same place. In silence, you gain awareness. And awareness is the first step toward control. Without awareness, you are only reacting. With awareness, you can choose. You can choose where your attention goes. You can choose which thoughts deserve your energy. You can choose which battles are worth fighting, and which ones are only there to distract you. And this is where the real work begins. Not the kind of work that gets attention. Not the kind that looks impressive online. But the kind of work that quietly changes the person you are becoming. And this is where the real work quietly begins to take shape. Not the kind of effort that looks impressive from the outside, not the kind that earns applause or attention, but the kind that actually transforms you from within. It is waking up early when no one is watching. It is choosing to stay focused when your mind is begging for escape. It is finishing what you started, even when it becomes uncomfortable, repetitive, or mentally exhausting. These are silent decisions, almost invisible to others, yet they carry real weight. They slowly reshape how your brain operates. Every single time you choose focus over distraction, you are reinforcing a pattern, one small decision at a time. And over time, that pattern stops being something you try to do, and becomes who you are. It becomes your identity. But most people never reach this level. Why? Because they are addicted to external noise. They rely on feedback, on recognition, on the feeling that they are being seen. They need to feel important, even if that feeling is artificial, even if it is only temporary. The more you depend on that external stimulation, the less control you have over your internal state. Your mood, your focus, your sense of progress, all become dependent on something outside of you. And that is exactly what silence disrupts. Silence breaks that dependency. It forces you to generate your own direction, your own discipline, your own sense of progress. At first, it feels uncomfortable, almost unsettling, because there is nothing left to distract you from yourself. But that discomfort is not a problem. It is a signal. It means you are starting to take your attention back. And once you reclaim your attention, everything begins to change. You stop chasing every opportunity that appears in front of you, and instead, you commit to one path. You stop reacting to every opinion, every comment, every piece of noise, and you begin to trust your own judgment. You stop filling your time just to feel productive, and you start doing work that actually moves your life forward. That is the real power of silence. It simplifies your world. It removes the excess, the unnecessary weight, so your actions can become stronger and more intentional. What remains is what truly matters. And what remains can finally be built with purpose. Silence is not about speaking less just for the sake of it. It is about protecting your energy from being wasted on things that do not deserve it. It is about choosing depth over noise, focus over distraction, and control over impulse. When you begin to operate from that place, something shifts. Your actions start to carry more weight. Your decisions become clearer. Your progress becomes real. Not because you are doing more, but because you are finally doing what matters, without interference. Most people do not avoid silence because they are too busy. They avoid it because silence removes every distraction they use to escape themselves. Because the moment everything becomes quiet, there is nothing left to scroll through, nothing left to react to, nothing left to hide behind. And suddenly, you are face to face with your own thoughts. That is where the discomfort begins. Not because something is wrong, but because you are finally seeing what has always been there. The doubts you ignored. The habits you never questioned. The patterns you kept repeating without even realizing it. Silence does not create these things. It reveals them. And most people are not prepared for that level of honesty. So what do? They run back to noise. They reach for their phone. They open another app. They start another conversation. Anything to keep their mind just occupied enough to avoid looking inward. It feels harmless. It feels normal. But over time, it becomes a pattern of avoidance. Instead of processing their thoughts, they suppress them. Instead of resolving tension, they bury it. And what is buried does not disappear. It builds pressure. It shows up later, in subtle ways. In constant anxiety. In lack of clarity. In that heavy feeling of being stuck without knowing why. That is the hidden cost of avoiding silence. And there is an even deeper layer to this. People have been conditioned to believe that being seen is the same as being valuable. The more attention they receive, the more important they feel. So they fill every moment of silence with expression, with opinions, with updates, with constant output. But this creates a dangerous cycle. You begin to depend on external reactions to feel like you are making progress. Even when nothing real is being built, it feels like something is happening. You start speaking before you act. You announce before you build. And over time, your identity becomes tied to perception, not reality. Silence breaks that cycle completely. And that is exactly why it feels so uncomfortable. Because it removes the illusion. There is no audience. No validation. No instant feedback. Just you, and the truth of your actions. And once the noise disappears, what you are left with is something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. No validation. No instant feedback. No external confirmation telling you that you are doing well. There is only you, and the truth of your actions. And that truth can feel uncomfortable, even confronting. You begin to see things clearly. You may realize you have been inconsistent. You may notice how often you get distracted. You may finally admit that you have been avoiding the work that actually matters. And instead of facing that reality, most people choose to stay in motion, because movement feels like progress, even when it is not. But constant motion without reflection leads nowhere. It keeps you busy, but it keeps you the same. You can fill every hour of your day, respond to everything, do 100 small tasks, and still feel stuck. Why? Because nothing is being processed. Nothing is being questioned. Nothing is being changed. Another reason people avoid silence is because it slows everything down. And in a world that rewards speed, that slowdown feels uncomfortable. Silence forces you to pause. It forces you to think before you react, to observe before you speak, and to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. That pause is powerful, but it is also unfamiliar. Most people are used to immediate responses, instant gratification, and constant stimulation. Silence removes that immediacy. And when it does, it begins to expose something deeper. You start noticing the urge to check your phone for no real reason. You feel the impulse to respond instantly, even when it is not necessary. You feel uncomfortable doing nothing, even for a moment. And you begin to ask yourself, where is this coming from? Those urges are not random. They are conditioned responses, built over time through repetition. And silence is the only environment where you can see them clearly. But here is what most people misunderstand. The discomfort you feel in silence is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is being revealed. Something that has always been there, but hidden beneath distraction. It is the beginning of awareness. And awareness is the first step toward change. Without awareness, you stay on autopilot. You repeat the same habits, make the same decisions, and end up with the same results. Day after day, without realizing it. Silence interrupts that loop. It creates a space, a small but powerful gap between who you have been and who you could become. And inside the gap, you are given a choice. You can return to the noise, go back to distraction, and continue the same cycle. Or you can stay in the silence long enough to understand yourself, to observe your patterns without judgment, to recognize where your attention has been wasted, to accept, honestly, what needs to change. That process is not comfortable. It is not easy. But it is necessary. Because real growth does not come from adding more into your life. It comes from removing what does not belong, and focusing on what truly matters. Most people never reach this point because they never allow themselves to stay still long enough. They keep moving, keep reacting, keep consuming, constantly filling the space, so they never have to face what is underneath. And in doing that, they avoid the one place where clarity actually exists. Silence is not empty. It is revealing. It shows you exactly where you stand, without filters, without distraction, without illusion. And once you see that clearly, you can no longer pretend that you do not know what needs to be done. That is why silence is so powerful. And that is exactly why it is avoided. Because silence demands honesty. It demands presence. It demands responsibility. But for those who are willing to face it, it becomes a turning point. The moment where you stop running, stop reacting, and start taking control of your own direction. And then you begin to understand something deeper. Noise is not just sound. It is everything that pulls your attention away from what actually matters. Every notification, every message, every piece of content, every small distraction. They all chip away at your ability to think clearly. In the moment, it feels normal. It feels harmless. But over time, it builds something dangerous. It creates mental clutter. And that clutter slowly erodes your clarity. Without clarity, you cannot make strong decisions. You cannot stay consistent. You cannot build anything that requires depth. Because your mind was never designed to process endless input from every direction. It was designed to focus, to think deeply, and to prioritize what truly matters. And when your mind is constantly overloaded like this, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. Instead of choosing what to focus on, your mind shifts into a reactive state. It stops leading and starts responding. Every notification, every message, every distraction pulls you in a new direction. You are no longer deciding your thoughts. You are simply reacting to whatever shows up next. And this is where most people live, in a constant loop of reaction. They wake up and immediately reach for their phone. They jump from one task to another without finishing anything. They respond to things that are not important. And by the end of the day, they feel completely exhausted, but not because they worked hard. They feel drained because their attention has been scattered across too many directions. This is the hidden cost of noise. It fragments your mind. You are never fully present in one place. Never fully committed to one task. Never fully engaged in what you are doing. And when your attention is divided like that, your output becomes weaker, less effective, less meaningful. Even simple tasks begin to take longer than they should. Work that requires depth becomes difficult, almost impossible. And slowly, your sense of progress starts to fade. You begin to feel stuck. Not because you lack ability, but because you have not stayed focused long enough to see results. Clarity needs space to exist, and noise destroys that space. When your mind is constantly occupied, there is no room for reflection, no room for strategic thinking, no room for insight. You find yourself always consuming, but rarely processing. Always reacting, but rarely deciding. Over time, this pattern weakens your ability to trust yourself. You begin to second-guess your choices. You hesitate more often. You look outside for answers before you even consider your own judgment. This is what happens when your internal signal becomes weaker than the external noise surrounding you. Attention is not just focus. It is energy. And like any form of energy, it is limited. Every time you give it to something unnecessary, you take it away from something that actually matters. Most people spend their best hours on distractions, on low-value tasks, on things that do not move their life forward. And then, they wonder why, when it is time to do meaningful work, they feel tired, unfocused, and unmotivated. It is not that they lack discipline. It is that their attention has already been spent. This is not about one big distraction ruining your day. It is about the accumulation of small ones. A quick check turns into 10 minutes. A short scroll becomes an hour. A simple reaction turns into a chain of thoughts that lingers long after the moment has passed. These small interruptions break your flow. And once your flow is broken, it takes time to rebuild it. But most people never allow that time. They interrupt themselves again and again, over and over, until deep focus becomes something they rarely experience. And without deep focus, you never access your full capacity. You stay on the surface, doing shallow work, thinking shallow thoughts, making shallow progress. That is why it feels like you are always moving, but never truly getting anywhere. Because you are operating in fragments. And fragments do not create momentum. Momentum comes from sustained attention. From staying with one thing long enough for it to grow, to compound, to develop into something meaningful. But noise interrupts that process constantly. It also begins to distort how you see yourself. When you are continuously exposed to other people's opinions, achievements, and lifestyles, your perception becomes unclear. You start comparing. You start questioning your own path. You begin to lose confidence in your direction. Instead of building your own clarity, you start borrowing fragments of other people's lives. And those fragments do not fit together. They create confusion. You no longer know what you truly want, because your mind is filled with too many external influences. This is why silence matters. Silence cuts through all of it. It removes the excess. It reduces the input. It gives your mind the space it needs to reset. And when you step away from noise, even for a short time, you begin to notice a shift. Your thoughts slow down. Your focus sharpens. Your decisions feel easier, more natural. Not because your life has suddenly changed, but because your mind is no longer overwhelmed. The real problem is that most people never stay in that state long enough. And the moment you step away from noise, even briefly, you begin to see how quickly most people fall back into it. They return to distraction at the first sign of discomfort. The moment things feel quiet, unfamiliar, or slightly uneasy, they reach for stimulation again. And by doing that, they reset the entire cycle. Their mind never gets the chance to fully recalibrate. It never gets the space it needs to stabilize. But if you can stay in that silence just a little longer, something starts to shift. Your attention becomes steady. Your thoughts begin to settle. Your priorities become clearer, sharper, more defined. You start to see what actually matters, and just as importantly, what does not. You stop reacting to everything around you, and instead, you begin to choose where your energy goes. That is where clarity begins. Not as something you suddenly discover, but as something you intentionally create, because clarity is not found. It is built. It is created by removing what does not belong. And noise is the biggest obstacle standing in the way of that process. If you want to think clearly, make better decisions, and move through life with purpose, you must protect your attention. Because once your attention is under control, everything else starts to fall into place. And control, real control, is not about managing other people or external situations. It is about mastering yourself. That level of control only exists when you are no longer driven by impulse. Most people believe they are in control simply because they can make decisions. But if you look closely, many of those decisions are not intentional at all. They are reactions. A message appears, and they respond immediately. Someone challenges them, and they defend themselves without pause. An emotion rises, and they act on it without thinking. That is not control. That is automatic behavior. And automatic behavior keeps you predictable. It keeps you reactive. It makes you easy to influence. Silence interrupts that pattern. It creates a space, a gap between what happens and how you respond. And that space is where your power lives. Without it, you are simply moving from one trigger to the next, never pausing long enough to choose your actions. But when that space exists, everything changes. You gain the ability to step back, to observe, to think, and then to decide. That shift may seem small, almost insignificant, but it changes everything. Because the moment you stop reacting instantly, you stop giving your power away to external situations. Your mind is built with two competing systems. One is fast, emotional, and reactive. It pushes you to respond quickly, to protect your ego, to seek comfort, and to avoid discomfort. The other system is slower, more deliberate, more focused. It allows you to evaluate, to plan, and to act with intention. Most people live in the first system because it requires no effort. It is automatic. It feels natural. But real control comes from strengthening the second system. And that only happens when you slow down. Silence is what allows that system to take over. When you choose silence instead of immediate reaction, you are training your mind to stay composed under pressure. You are teaching yourself that not everything requires a response. Not every emotion needs to be expressed. Not every situation deserves your energy. That is discipline, not the loud kind. Not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that is internal, steady, and consistent. The kind that shows up in how you think, how you carry yourself, and how you act when no one is watching. Think about how often people lose control without even realizing it. They argue just to prove a point. They speak just to fill empty space. They react just to release tension. In those moments, it feels like they are doing something. But in reality, they are being controlled by the situation itself. True control looks very different. It is calm. It is measured. It does not rush. It does not need to win every moment. It does not seek validation through reaction. And silence strengthens the control, because it forces you to sit with your impulses without immediately acting on them. At first, this feels uncomfortable. You will feel the urge to respond, to explain, to defend yourself. But if you can stay in that moment, just for a little longer, something begins to shift. The intensity of the impulse fades. Your thinking becomes clearer. And you start to realize that the reaction you felt so strongly was not even necessary. That realization builds a different kind of confidence. Not the confidence that comes from being right, but the confidence that comes from being in control of yourself. Over time, this practice changes how you operate. You become less reactive and more deliberate. You stop getting pulled into unnecessary conflicts. You stop wasting energy on things that do not matter. And because you are no longer reacting to everything, your actions become more focused, more intentional. You begin to choose your battles carefully. You begin to speak with purpose, not impulse. And that is where real control begins to show. And as you begin to choose your responses more carefully, something deeper starts to take shape within you. You start acting based on your values, not your emotions. And that is what true self-mastery looks like. It is not about suppressing what you feel or pretending those emotions do not exist. It is about feeling them fully, yet not being controlled by them. It is about noticing the impulse, recognizing it clearly, and then deciding, consciously, whether you will act on it or let it pass. That decision, that small moment of awareness, is where your real power lies. And the more you practice making that choice, the stronger it becomes. Over time, it turns into a habit. A quiet, internal strength that most people never develop. Silence becomes the place where this strength is built. It is your training ground. It is where you learn to observe instead of react, to think instead of rush, to choose instead of follow. It is where you develop the ability to stay steady, even when everything around you is trying to pull you in different directions. And that kind of steadiness is rare. Most people are constantly shifting, constantly adjusting based on what is happening around them. Their mood changes with opinions. Their actions change with pressure. Their direction changes with circumstances. But when you build control, you become consistent. You stop moving based on the moment, and start moving based on your direction. And that is what makes silence so powerful. It is not just about being quiet. It is about becoming stable. It is about building a level of internal control that does not depend on what is happening outside of you. When you reach that point, you no longer feel the need to react to everything. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself, to defend yourself, or to explain every decision you make. You act when it matters. And you stay silent when it does not. And in doing that, you protect something incredibly valuable, your energy, your focus, and your direction. Because control is not something you declare. It is something you demonstrate. It shows up in your actions, especially in the moments when no one is watching. In the moments where you choose not to react, not to speak, not to follow the impulse. Those moments may seem small, almost invisible, but they are building something powerful. They are building a version of you that is no longer controlled by the outside world, but guided from within. And yet, most people never reach this point. Why? Because they talk about their goals more than they work on them. They spend more time announcing what they are going to do than actually doing it. And that is exactly why they stay where they are. Because saying what you are going to do feels like progress. It feels like movement. It gives you a temporary sense of identity, a version of yourself that you have not yet earned. You say you are going to get in shape. You say you are building something. You say you are changing your life. And for a moment, it feels real. But that feeling is misleading. It is not progress. It is a substitute for progress. And the more you rely on that feeling, the less you actually do. Your brain does not clearly distinguish between talking about action and taking action. So when you announce your goals, you receive a small reward, a sense of satisfaction, sometimes even validation from others. And that creates a false signal. It tricks your mind into believing that something has already been accomplished, even when nothing has changed. And once that signal is triggered, your urgency fades. The pressure to act weakens. You feel like you are already moving forward, even though you have not taken a single real step. That is why so many people start strong, full of energy and intention, and then slowly fade. They spent their energy on talking, not doing. They imagined the outcome. They visualize the result. And by the time it is actually time to work, the emotional drive is already gone. They have already consumed the reward without earning it. And what remains is discipline. And without discipline, nothing moves forward. That is why building in silence matters. When you stop talking about your goals, you remove that illusion. You stop feeding yourself premature satisfaction. There is no applause, no validation, no recognition. There is only the work. And that changes everything, because now, progress is no longer based on how you feel. It is based on what gets done. Every action becomes real, measurable, undeniable. You either showed up, or you did not. You either followed through, or you did not. There is no space to hide behind words anymore. And yes, that shift is uncomfortable at first, because you lose the identity that comes from talking. You can no longer call yourself disciplined, you have to prove it. You can no longer say you are focused, you have to demonstrate it through consistent action. And that is where real transformation begins. And once you stop talking and start proving it through action, the real work quietly begins. You have to demonstrate it through consistency. And that takes time. It takes repetition. It takes showing up and doing the same things again and again, even when no one notices, even when no one is watching, even when there is no recognition at all. Because that is where real change actually happens. not in the moment you declare a goal, but in the quiet days that follow, when your attention stays exactly where it belongs on the process. You are no longer thinking about how things look from the outside. You are thinking about how things improve on the inside. You are not concerned with how people perceive you. You are focused on one question: am I getting better today than I was yesterday? That level of focus creates momentum. Small actions begin to stack. One decision leads to another. One disciplined moment builds on the next. And slowly, progress becomes visible, not to the world, but to you. And that internal feedback, that quiet evidence you build for yourself, becomes far more powerful than any external validation ever could be. There is also something else happening in that silence. Protection. Because the truth is, not everyone understands your direction. Not everyone sees your vision. And when you share your goals too early, you expose them to opinions that can weaken your focus. Doubt from others can slowly turn into doubt within yourself. Questions from people who are not on your path can create hesitation. Silence removes that interference. It gives your ideas space to grow without being diluted. It keeps your focus intact while you are still building your foundation. And over time, something begins to shift in how you see yourself. You stop feeling the need to tell people who you are becoming, because you start seeing it in your actions. You wake up and do the work without announcing it. You stay consistent without trying to prove it. You move forward without needing validation. And from that, a different kind of confidence begins to form. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that is built on evidence. You trust yourself because you have seen yourself follow through. You have watched yourself do the work, repeatedly, quietly, consistently. And that is where identity begins to change. Not through words. Not through intention, but through repetition. Each day you act in alignment with your goals. You reinforce a new pattern. And over time, that pattern becomes who you are. You are no longer someone who wants to change. You are someone who is changing. And that distinction changes everything, because one is based on desire. The other is based on behavior. Eventually, the results begin to show. Not because you talked about them, but because you built them. And when they do appear, they carry weight. Because they are real. They are backed by action, by consistency, by time invested without recognition. At that point, you do not need to explain anything. The work speaks for itself. And that is the real purpose of silence. It is not about hiding your goals. It is about protecting them while they are still fragile. It is about giving yourself the space to build without distraction, without pressure, without the need to perform for anyone else. It is about shifting your focus from talking to doing, from intention to execution, from image to reality. And once you make that shift, everything changes, because you are no longer chasing the feeling of progress. You are creating it. But with that change comes something most people are not prepared for: separation. The moment you start changing for real, you begin to move away from the version of yourself that people are used to. And that is where friction begins. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are no longer predictable. People are comfortable when you stay the same, when your behavior fits the version they have already accepted. But when you raise your standards, when you shift your habits, when you become more focused and more disciplined, you disrupt that image. And most people do not respond well to disruption. Even if your change is positive, it often shows up in subtle ways at first. Questions that seem harmless, but carry doubt underneath. Comments that make your discipline seem unnecessary. Small remarks that try to pull you back into familiar patterns. You might hear things like, "You are doing too much. You are being too serious. You are overthinking. You have changed." And the truth is, you have. And that is exactly the point. And that discomfort you feel from others, it is not resistance to you, it is a reflection of your growth. The truth is, you have changed. And that is the point. But for the people around you, your growth creates discomfort. Why? Because it quietly exposes what they are not doing. It forces them to see the gap between where they are and where they could be. And instead of stepping forward to close that gap, many will try to pull you back to where they feel safe, where things are familiar, where nothing is challenged. And this is where most people lose their progress, not because they lack ability, but because they seek approval. They want to grow, but at the same time, they want to be understood. They want to move forward, but they do not want to lose connection. So they begin to adjust. Slowly, subtly, almost without realizing it. They explain themselves more. They justify their choices. They soften their discipline. And little by little, they drift back into the same patterns they once tried to escape. But real transformation does not allow that. It requires something difficult. It requires you to choose direction over approval. It requires you to accept that not everyone will understand your path. And more importantly, it requires you to realize that understanding is not necessary for progress. When you build in silence, you are not just protecting your focus. You are preparing yourself for this exact moment. Because silence trains you to rely on your own judgment, not on external validation. It teaches you to move forward without constant feedback, to continue without needing reassurance from others. And yes, there will be moments when you feel alone. Moments when your routine looks different from everyone around you. When your priorities no longer match your environment. When your choices set you apart instead of blending you in. But that feeling is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is changing. It means you are no longer following the default path. Most people never experience this because they never step far enough away from the crowd. They stay within the same habits, the same conversations, the same level of effort. But the moment you raise your standards, you enter a different space. And that space is quieter, it is more focused, but it is also more isolated. So the real question becomes, can you handle that isolation without losing your direction? Can you keep showing up when no one is acknowledging your effort? When no one is validating your progress? When no one fully understands what you are building? Because that is the test. If your motivation depends on being seen, it will not survive in silence. But if your motivation is internal, if it is tied to who you are becoming, then it becomes stable. It no longer rises and falls based on other people's reactions. It becomes something you carry within you. And as you move forward, something else begins to shift. You start seeing people differently. Not with judgment, but with clarity. You begin to notice patterns you used to participate in without thinking. Conversations that lead nowhere. Habits that drain your energy. Distractions that once felt normal. And because you are more aware, you become more selective. You choose where your time goes. You choose who you engage with. You choose what deserves your attention and what does not. And that selectivity is not arrogance. It is alignment. It reflects the standards you are building. At the same time, you stop feeling the need to explain yourself. Not because you are hiding anything, but because you understand something important. Constant explanation pulls your focus away from execution and places it on perception. And perception does not build results. Action does. Once you truly understand that, you become comfortable with being misunderstood. You realize that clarity does not come from convincing others. It comes from staying consistent with your own actions day after day. And over time, the distance between you and the crowd becomes more visible. Not because you are trying to stand out, but because your behavior is different. You are more focused, more disciplined, more intentional. While others are still reacting, still explaining, still seeking validation, you are building quietly, consistently, without interruption. And that difference, it compounds. And as that quiet consistency continues to build, something powerful begins to reveal itself over time. At first, it may not be obvious. The changes are subtle, almost invisible. But slowly, steadily, they become undeniable. And when that happens, something interesting unfolds. The same people who once questioned your path begin to notice your results. The same silence that once made you seem distant now makes you appear grounded, composed, and in control. The same discipline that once looked unnecessary now starts to look impressive. But by that point, something has shifted within you. It no longer matters what they think, because you are no longer doing it for them. You are doing it because this is who you have become. And that is an important distinction. Because the separation you feel is not the goal. It is simply the byproduct. The real goal is alignment. Alignment between your actions and your values. Alignment between who you say you want to be and what you actually do every day. And achieving that alignment requires something most people avoid: letting go. Letting go of the need to fit in. Letting go of the need to be understood. Letting go of the need for approval. It requires you to move in your own direction, even when that direction pulls you away from what feels familiar, comfortable, or accepted. And if you can do that, if you can stay consistent through that shift, something deeper happens. You do not just change your habits. You change your identity. You become someone who is no longer defined by the crowd, but by the standards you choose to live by. And that kind of transformation is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is not a sudden burst of motivation. It is a system built through repetition, through consistent action, through showing up day after day. And this is where most people misunderstand the process. They believe everything will change once they feel ready, once they feel inspired, once they find the perfect mindset. But motivation is unstable. Feelings are unreliable. If your progress depends on how you feel, your progress will always be inconsistent. That is why so many people start strong, full of energy, and then slowly stop. Because they were relying on emotion, not structure. A system removes that dependency. A system does not ask how you feel. It tells you what to do. You wake up at a set time. You follow a routine. You complete specific actions, regardless of your mood, your energy, or your circumstances. And it is that consistency, not intensity, that creates real progress. Not because each action is extraordinary, but because it is repeated. Small actions, done every day, begin to compound. And over time, they reshape how you think, how you behave, and ultimately who you are. You do not rise to your goals. You fall to your systems. Goals matter because they give direction. But they do not create results on their own. They are emotional. They are aspirational. They change. A system is different. It is grounded in behavior. It defines what you actually do every day, not what you hope will happen someday. And when you rely on systems, something important happens. You remove the guesswork. You no longer wake up wondering what you should do. You already know. And that clarity reduces friction. It makes action easier. And when action becomes easier, consistency increases. And consistency is what builds identity. Not what you say. Not what you plan, but what you repeat. Every time you follow your system, you reinforce a pattern. You prove to yourself that you can show up, that you can execute, that you can stay committed. And that proof builds trust. And once you trust yourself, everything changes. You move differently. You stop hesitating. You stop second-guessing your decisions. You stop looking outward for validation. You act, not because you feel like it, but because it is who you are. And most people never reach this point, because they are chasing intensity instead of consistency. They want big changes, fast results, dramatic shifts. But real transformation does not look like that. It is quiet. It is repetitive. Sometimes, it is even boring. It looks like waking up early, even when you do not feel like it. Training your body when it is uncomfortable. Staying focused when distractions are everywhere. Doing the same things, again and again, without immediate reward. It does not feel exciting, but it is effective. And in the end, effectiveness is what matters. Because a system does more than create results. It protects your focus. And when your system begins to take over, everything starts to feel different in the way you move through your day. When your day is structured, something powerful happens. You remove the constant need to decide what comes next. You are no longer wasting energy figuring things out moment by moment. Instead, your attention stays where it matters, on execution, and that alone reduces mental fatigue. It frees up your mind, allowing you to go deeper into your work. Because real progress is not found on the surface. It is found in depth. Without structure, your mind drifts. You react to whatever shows up. A message, a notification, a random thought, and suddenly your focus is gone. Your day becomes fragmented, broken into pieces that never fully connect. But with structure, your actions begin to align with your priorities. You stop moving based on impulse, and start moving with direction. And this goes beyond just the mind. There is a physical side to this as well. Discipline is not only something you think about. It is something you live through your body. When you train physically, when you push through discomfort, when you follow through on commitments that challenge you, you are building more than strength. You are training your ability to endure resistance. And that strength carries over. It shows up in your work, in your focus, in your ability to stay consistent even when things become difficult. Because the body and the mind are connected. And when your system trains both, you become more resilient, more stable, more capable. At the beginning, this structure may feel restrictive. You might feel like you are losing freedom. Like you are forcing yourself into something rigid, something uncomfortable. But over time, something shifts. You begin to realize that structure does not take freedom away. It creates it. Because when your habits are aligned, you no longer waste energy on decisions that do not matter. You do not struggle to start. You do not hesitate. You simply execute. And that removes friction. It allows you to move faster, with more clarity, and far more effectively. What once felt like discipline slowly becomes automatic. And that is when transformation becomes visible, not because of a single breakthrough moment, not because of sudden inspiration, but because your actions have been consistent for long enough to produce results. Your focus sharpens. Your energy becomes more stable. Your confidence begins to grow, not from what others say, but from what you have proven to yourself. You begin to see what you are capable of, not as an idea, but as evidence. Because you have built it through your system. Step by step. Day by day. And throughout all of this, silence plays a critical role. It protects your system. It keeps you from being pulled into distractions. It prevents you from explaining your process too early. It removes the need to seek validation before the work is done. It allows your system to operate without interference, without noise, without pressure. And when your system is protected like that, your progress accelerates. Because transformation is not something you wait for. It is something you build. It is built through structure, through repetition, through discipline that does not depend on how you feel. It is built in silence, away from attention, away from validation, away from distraction. And if you commit to that process, if you trust your system and follow it consistently, something deeper happens. You do not just change your habits. You change who you are. And when you reach that point, you begin to understand something clearly. You were never stuck because you lacked talent. You were stuck because your mind was being pulled in every direction. You reacted too quickly. You explained too much. You kept trying to be seen. But now, you move differently. Now you build in silence.